through the RNC.
Well, the Republican National Convention ended last night with President Trump accepting the nomination for a second term in office and delivering a scathing attack against his Democratic challenger, Joe Biden. The president once again blurred the lines between government business and campaign politics, using the White House backdrop to deliver his remarks. He spoke for an hour and 10 minutes, the second longest convention speech in modern history, following his own remarks back in 2016. Even in the midst of a pandemic, roughly 1,500 supporters crowded onto the White House lawn to watch the president speak. Chairs were not spaced out for social distancing, and few people were wearing masks. White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows told reporters, quote, a number of people would be tested for coronavirus. Great. In his message to supporters, President Trump defended his own record and warned of the potential threat of a Joe Biden presidency.
In recent months, our nation and the world has been hit by the once-in-a-century pandemic that China allowed to spread around the globe. If we had listened to Joe, hundreds of thousands more Americans would have died. Instead of following the science, Joe Biden wants to inflict a painful shutdown on the entire country. The cost of the Biden shutdown would be measured in increased drug overdoses, depression, alcohol addiction, suicides, heart attacks, economic devastation, job loss, and much more. Joe Biden's plan is not a solution to the virus, but rather it's a surrender to the virus. At no time before have voters faced a clearer choice between two parties, two visions, two philosophies, or two agendas. This election will decide whether we save the American dream or whether we allow a socialist agenda to demolish our cherished destiny. Joe Biden is not a savior of America's soul. He is the destroyer of America's jobs. And if given the chance, he will be the destroyer of American greatness.
Yeah, the same Joe Biden who's been in Washington since '74. He's trying to paint him as a socialist. That doesn't work. But John Heilman, confession or projection, Donald Trump saying that things would have been much worse if Joe Biden had been president during the coronavirus. If we had done what Joe told us to do in a late January op-ed in the USA Today, Joe Biden told the president, you're not prepared for this pandemic. Listen to your scientists and doctors and let them lead. This is the same time the president was saying it's one person coming in from China. A full month later, after Biden's warning, Donald Trump says it's 15 people coming in and it's going to be gone. The next month, he said this will be gone in April. Then he started talking about disinfectants and UV lights, on and on and on. But, you know, I am really struck, though, by that image, John. If you're a senior citizen in Florida, if you're a senior citizen in Arizona, if you're a senior citizen in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and you look at 1,000 people packed in to one space without social distancing, without masks, and you're thinking, you know, about 200,000 people have died, mainly senior citizens. I'm not really hearing what he's saying. I'm looking at what he's doing, and that is a super spreader event. Here we have the President of the United States in the middle of a pandemic, the worst pandemic in a century, as he said. He's correct there. Conducting, it's unbelievable.
It's so
conducting as his final night of his convention, a super spreader event in the middle of a pandemic as we move toward flu season. Shocking.
Yeah, I mean, the optics are kind of incredible, Joe, and it speaks, I think, to some of this alternate reality thing. You know, the president is, as you know, and as we've often commented on over the last 5-6 years, right? He's a television producer, and you saw how enraptured he and his people became with what they thought was an ability to spin an image last night that would be gaudy, that would be beautiful in their minds, beautiful television. And those human beings that we are going to have, he told us last week, we are going to have live crowds. We are going to have a lot more of this convention's not going to be taped, although they'd had a lot of taped material. But this is what he was thinking about when he told us last week how different the convention would be from Joe Biden's convention. They had this image and the fireworks last night, which were genuinely spectacular, just qua fireworks. They were incredible, right? But that's the problem. The problem is super spreader. It's the first word that came to everyone's mind when you saw this group gathering on the mall. And it's the case right now that 1,000 people a day are still dying in this country. It's not just that the total is nearly 200,000, 185, whatever the number is now, but 1,000 people a day are dying. Americans know that. I have in the last couple weeks, as you guys know, because of the circus, I've been traveling for the first time in months. And, you know, whether it's been in Charlotte, North Carolina, where I was, here in Washington, D.C., people are still afraid of this virus, and rightly so. People are taking care. People are hand sanitizing. People are in masks. People are taking care of themselves because they're terrified still by the fact that 1,000 people a day are dying. And then they look up on their television screen. They're not stupid. They look up on that screen and say, that's reckless. That's I don't care about how beautiful the television is. That's irresponsible. It's reckless, and it plays right into the fact that the way Joe Biden has conducted himself has not just been safe, but has been good politics because people right now value safety. This man does not.
Jonathan Lemire.
Yeah.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.